compared to Bolt. But go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I don't even know where the phrase comes from, but a brick is not a wall means relevance is a relatively low bar. It doesn't mean nothing, but it's not an onerous threshold like showing that this piece of evidence is going to prove your whole case. No, it just means you get information and you get to introduce it in court if it will make a fact at issue ever so slightly more or less probable. And then with all those individual pieces of information, all those little bricks that are each relevant on their own, you build a case.
Right. And finally, there's a great book, Why Innocent People Plead Guilty, because they face such an enormous stacking of criminal charges and the enormity of it all. And I guess we could imagine a situation where a prosecutor is sitting there saying, take this deal, we'll give you 5 years or else you're going to face 50 because we've got this evidence based upon AI. As a very intimidating moment for an overworked, as one of my colleagues was saying, defense attorney. Is that a concern of yours?
Absolutely a concern. I absolutely agree, and I'll just add to this concern that many indigent defense counsel may not have the resources to challenge the AI, but also individual defendants might the cost of fighting the case, even when they maintain their innocence, could be so great, risk of losing your job, risk of losing custody of your children, your home, that it is perfectly rational to plead guilty even when you haven't committed the crime.
All right. Chief Aguilar, it's interesting as an African American who lives in an African American community that's highly impacted by crime that you have these two dueling reactions. One is you see how unfair the criminal justice system is. I grew up in a predominantly white area, went to Stanford, Yale, saw lots of drug use, the enforcement of which was nil to nothing. But in communities of color that like mine, you see a tremendous amount of drug use. And then on the flip side, you see all these crimes, as you were eloquently putting, that are going on in your neighborhood that aren't being solved. So you have this almost double down discontent with your public safety, and that's a problem. There's one great criminal justice writer that says black communities have too much of the policing they don't want and not enough of the policing that they need in terms of, as we said, the closeout rates of murders and shootings and the like. But your story is extraordinary. So I was so excited that you came as a witness today because you're working so hard to restore that trust within communities, and that technology. And I saw this where the ACLU was dead set against me using camera technology and shot spotters. We invited them in to help us write the operating procedures. And then how much my community wanted this technology being used on their streets, because like, you don't live here, we want cameras on our streets and the like. So I guess this tension that I've lived my life is something you struggle with every day, and technology brings a whole new era of challenges to something that's so important for law enforcement, which is police community trust. And so I'm hoping with that context, could you sort of tell me what your hope is amidst this for restoring the kind of trust needed to safely, for communities to be safe? And then what is the excitement that you have as you see the future of this technology to even better help the most impacted communities have the kind of safety and security every community deserves?
So, Senator, to your point, absolutely. We know that, at least through my experience, in the communities that are the most affected by gun violence, I have never heard anyone in those communities say we need less of this. They want everything that we can throw at the problem so that their children stop dying. Right? That's the overriding concern in the communities that are most affected by gun violence. And so what I found is that these tools have helped us hone in on those people that are the drivers of repeat gun violence. We know through numerous studies that it's usually about 5% of our gun offenders that are driving 50% of the shootings. So AI has given us the opportunity, along with traditional policing methods, where we employ micro hotspot policing, where we focus on repeat offenders. We saw, for example, a disturbing trend in some domestic homicide cases where those incidents were preceded not by felony incidents of domestic violence, but by misdemeanors that perhaps we couldn't get to quick enough. And so we found a way to identify those people that were repeat offenders for domestic violence that were also carrying out other crimes, to where when we're talking about carrying out enforcement that's preventative in nature, we're not targeting entire communities so much as we're targeting those 5% of offenders and 5% of locations that drive 50% of our violent crime. So I think that numerous studies have also shown that the more police officers we have out there, the more resources, human resources, the more positive our impact on crime rates. But it goes beyond that, where we have to just also embrace a lot of these technologies that help us focus on the right people that are driving violence in our communities.
And technology is clearly a force multiplier. It allows one individual to do a lot more work, a lot more quickly. And you've been a homicide investigator, so you understand that, yes?
These technologies can cut out hours, even weeks worth of time in certain instances where we're talking video analytics, where we can get several weeks worth of footage and be able to compress it to those points that are most relevant and of evidentiary value. Absolutely.
And then how do you see? Is there anything on the frontiers that gets you really excited about where you think policing might be with these tools in 5 years, 10 years from now?
I think that. I think that a lot of the technologies, just like I mentioned earlier with ballistic evidence, to where we sometimes have a hard time considering that artificial intelligence. A lot of these technologies are going to become more mainstream. We use, with facial recognition as an example, we use it in our daily lives just to get into our phone several times a day. And so I think that these technologies hold a great deal of promise. I think that they become smarter and more accurate with time. We just have to put behind it the responsible policy, the right amount of research. The NIST facial recognition vendor testing, for example, is an excellent resource. If we were to consider, if Congress were to consider federal funding for some of these technologies, comparing it to sources that are available, like the NIST vendor testing, will be greatly helpful.
What about training and accountability of police officers? I mean, my police union resisted body cams, and then it shifted really quickly. They appreciated them because for citizen complaints, it was a very good video to have. My former director now thinks body cams is great for that. All that footage is great for training because you can break down officer interactions. I'm imagining that could be done with AI, looking at the volumes and hours, looking for certain patterns that might help to create more accountable policing. Have you used it all to hold your police to higher levels of accountability and transparency?
So, Senator, to your first point, there's never enough training, and so I am always a fan of more and better training. Right now, we are looking into a research partnership to where we will use artificial intelligence to go through those hours and weeks worth of body cam footage to not only highlight problematic behavior but also commendable behavior.
Yeah, you know, I saw, I just had a sheriff in New Jersey commit suicide. I have seen officer mental health challenges. I was just talking to a reporter about the Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, and they saw a lot of predictive analytics for officer misconduct. One of them, which is actually doing suicide calls, seemed to be something that would pop up before an officer would have an interaction with a citizen that was negative. And I don't know if that's something you're thinking about how to see how AI might be able to help in that space to anticipate officer behavior who might need more training.
Without a doubt, Senator, I think that any technology that'll help us flag problematic behavior, we've seen it. We've seen officers whose careers have come to a very ugly end, right? And they're often preceded by problematic behavior where that officer could have benefited from early intervention. And so we as a police department can't correct problematic behavior that we're not aware of. And so if this technology helps us get there, I'm all for it, absolutely.
And so I would imagine, and the last question, and I'd like to move on to Dr. Howard. I do hear this, though, still in my community. My young kids are stopped by and frisked more than any other community. This doesn't happen in wealthier, whiter communities. Now we're under video surveillance in ways that other communities are not. Now they have facial recognition that we're exposed to more than other communities. You can see how that list can go on and on and on and on, which I wonder people start to feel like they're under a surveillance state or feel like they're having their just basic privacies. Can you empathize with that feeling, or is that just not your experience that you're seeing out there at all?
So, Senator, I think that right now video cameras are ubiquitous. I read in one place, I can't remember the exact source, but the United States is second only to China in terms of the number of video cameras that the average citizen encounters every day. The difference, of course, being that most of the video cameras that we as Americans encounter are owned by individuals, are owned by the private sector. And so I think that perhaps in some communities that are more prone to gun violence, where some of the cameras belong to law enforcement versus other communities where they're held by individuals in the private sector. But I do think that right now being under some form of camera surveillance is just an accepted part of life for all communities throughout the United States.
Thank you. Dr. Howard, I was really appreciative of your sort of best practices, and they resonated with Dr. Wexler in a significant way. And one of the things I think that resonates with Chief Aguilar is just this idea of training. Could you just go another level deeper on that? You said how important it is for analyst training. What does that mean?
So we know that in order for these tools to be used properly, the analyst decisions before the algorithm comes into play are critical, and the analyst decisions afterwards. So if we think about any one of these, if we think about latent print analysis, for example, just to use a different one, the analyst, somebody in the human chain, collects a fingerprint at a crime scene or from a piece of evidence, processes that fingerprint, scans it, decides whether it's of sufficient quality to even be able to match it to something else or to attempt to link it to somebody else, marks it up, or has a computer program mark it up on where are the key features of this fingerprint that might be worth comparing with a database, puts it into the algorithm. All the algorithm is doing is comparing it to a database of prints. There's nothing magical about that. That's been done for decades on computers. Before that, on cards stored in files, they would pull out the cards and they would compare each fingerprint. So all the algorithm is doing is speeding up that comparison process. And then at the end, it puts out a candidate list. And that candidate list is nothing more than the top 10, 20, 50, however many the program is designed for, or however many the analyst has asked for, of the best matching candidates from the best match at the top to the lesser matches as you move down the list. But that doesn't say anything about the strength of the actual evidence. The person at the top of the list might actually be a lousy match, but it's the best match in the database. And that's all the algorithm is able to do. If you have a partial print or a smeared print or one that's distorted, they may not be able to get a very good match. And if you were putting a % match on it, which is not what these algorithms do, but if you were doing that, it might say something like 35% match, and that's your number one candidate. Analysts often do not understand that. They often think, this is my number one candidate, or these are my top 10. It's got to be one of these people that came up at the top of the list. And in reality, it might be somebody completely different. All the algorithm can do is find the best matches to whatever quality fingerprint they're given. And it has to be somebody who's already in the database. And obviously not everybody has their fingerprints in every database that could be used for comparison. So a lot of human understanding at the beginning about what quality of print is good enough, and human understanding at the end about what do these results really mean.
Right, but variations in training for local police departments could vary widely and end up with widely different results.
That's absolutely true.
And so that's why one of your recommendations is to have national standards, right?
We think national standards would help to drive the conversation. If there were standards at the federal level, or if there were standards that applied to how much is good enough, right? What quality of print is good enough to put into a latent print algorithm? Some of those kinds of standards could start to bring more consistency to this and help reduce the potential for well-meaning human investigators who are doing their best to solve a crime to be able to use the tools more effectively and interpret the results more efficiently.
Right, and how would you feel? Is that overly prescriptive for the federal government? Because I'm a big believer, having run a local police department, how cash-strapped you are, how you're constantly battling for resources. And so things like COPS grants and other grants for technology are really critical. But how would you feel if those grants came with a requirement for certain standards for your analysts and the like? Is that overly burdensome?
Senator, I think that it's a bit of a broad question, but I think that just generally speaking, a grant that comes with a requirement that the agency receiving the grant properly train to a particular standard the people who are going to be carrying out the function, I don't think is overly burdensome.
Great. And so, Dr. Howard, last question. When you say increased transparency, are you getting at some of the things that Professor Wexler is talking about in terms of the need of opening up these algorithms to peer review and to sort of a more adversarial analysis?
So we looked at the criminal investigation portion, which I realize feeds into the courtroom, but we did not look at the courtroom processes that might occur. So I want to set the stage with that. But the experts we spoke with indicated that transparency is critical, both in terms of how the algorithm was built, what if it's an AI-enabled algorithm, what training data were used, but also then transparency about has it been tested, what is the accuracy of this through something like the NIST, facial recognition vendor testing, what accuracy was determined through that kind of testing, what demographic bias did this algorithm exhibit through that kind of testing. That can be very useful information, and our experts were very much in favor of that. Opening the source code, though, our experts told us is not necessary. It is a path to figuring out how the algorithm works. It is not the only path in the view of the experts we spoke with. Independent third-party testing can accomplish many of the same things.
And you guys noted in your report that there was a lack of independent, a lack of sufficient independent validation. Is that? Would you?
That is often true, yes. The NIST tests, which are top-of-the-line gold standard testing, they are done only if a vendor chooses to submit its algorithm for testing. There's no requirement for a vendor to do that. And you're saying,
so right now the DOJ, there's a lack in the DOJ's engagement of this technology right now. There's a lack of sufficient independent oversight.
So we didn't look at the DOJ in depth in terms of how they validate their algorithms. We did talk to a number of officials at FBI, and they told us, and I believe this is in our report, that they worked with NIST to develop a validation protocol that they then run in-house.
But you haven't evaluated that?
We have not evaluated it, no. That was not part of the scope of our work. It's work we could do if there was interest.
Well, I have interest, but I can't speak for the DOJ. But if you were to be called upon to do that analysis, one of the things you would be looking at is sort of an independent, objective review, a sufficient review of algorithms of the technology itself, correct?
Of the algorithm accuracy, demographic bias, features like that.
And what's the danger of perhaps them not having done that right now?
Then they may not know how effectively their algorithm works, and they may not know that the candidate list they get out could be skewed by, for example, biased training data that the algorithm was trained on. They just may not be aware of that if they haven't run that.
I mean, should that set off alarms? Should I be writing to the DOJ and saying, look, I have legitimate concerns that you have not tested this in a sufficient way?
I would say any law enforcement entity that's using an algorithm that has not been validated in a form that would be considered defensible should set off alarms, absolutely.
Okay. And then finally, Ms. Wexler, again, you traveled the farthest, and I'm grateful. But I do wonder, you obviously have a lot of concerns in your testimony, but there are also protections that AI tools could use. I always think of these waves of technology as potentially democratizing, because you talked about the possible expense of a defense attorney in a situation, but AI might be a tool that defense attorneys could use to help out. You've done a lot of writing and obviously sit with the technology group at Bolt. Are there some things that give you hope when you look at this technology that you might want to put into the record?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. To be clear, my concerns are neutral about the technology itself. I think AI technologies have potential to increase accuracy and efficacy of law enforcement investigations and prosecutions, and also have the potential to help criminal defense investigators identify evidence of innocence. So the technologies themselves are not the issue. It's the legal rules that we set up around them to help us ensure that they are the best, most accurate and effective tools and not flawed or fraudulent in some way.
I just want to say, before I give my sort of closing remarks, number one, I'm just so grateful to Senator Cotton with a lot of demands, given some of the international issues that are going on, for him to be here and give such, I thought, a really important line of questioning. His partnership is extraordinary. But I want to thank the three witnesses. It is a frontier that we have that I think it's difficult to anticipate where we will be in 5 years from now, and this technology is really accelerating. The challenge for government, and I've seen this in waves of innovation, is that we have not moved as fast as the innovations around us. I've seen this in nuclear energy, I've seen this in drone technology. Government has not been able to keep up. Maybe a platform of the substantive accord that we have in a bipartisan way on some of the challenges with social media, for example, is another great example. You all are on the cutting edge of looking at this, and it's exciting to me not only to hear your testimony, but to hear what some common sense precautions could be on a federal level, as well as ways to try to figure out how to advance the technology to the greatest aims of humanity, which is a democratic system that protects the rights of all individuals, including rights to privacy, as well as what I think is a fundamental human right, or a freedom that we should have, which is a freedom from fear, a freedom from the kind of depraved criminality that we often see manifesting in communities as well. So this testimony has been rich. They're both your written testimony and your verbal testimony. It gives me a lot of gratitude. I know that Congress as a whole is looking at AI from every different perspective. This is, from what I know of, the first hearing in the Senate that really is focusing in on its effect in the criminal justice system. My hope is that you all will be available in the future to consulting with us. There may be some potential for some great bipartisan ideas to come out of this, or at the very least, opening up conversations with some of the key actors in law enforcement on the federal level. I cannot tell you, Chief Aguilar, as a guy who lives in a community that has struggled with a lot of the issues that yours has, the heroic work that you're doing every single day. It's just something that means a lot to me, and I look forward to visiting it, hopefully. And the truth of the matter is, I'm a little concerned that we'll be confused for each other because we're both, have similar haircuts. But I'm hoping that that won't be the case. But I want to remind everyone that the subcommittee, that questions for the record are due a week from today. Wednesday, January 31st at 5:30 p.m. And I hope that should there be questions, because again, the senators have been pulled in so many different directions. My ranking members team might have some questions for the record as well. I hope that you all, after all the sacrifice you made getting here, preparing written testimony and testifying, that you will still be able to respond in a timely fashion to any questions that are sent to you. When you testify before the United States Senate, I know how important that is. It may seem like a small subcommittee hearing, but it is a service to your country, and the work that you all are doing, to me, stands in that stead of patriotism, of giving to a nation, helping us to be better. Today was very, very helpful, and I'm grateful to each of you individually for participating and being a part. With that, the subcommittee is adjourned.